It all began in a Mexican restaurant, much like this one. It was 1985. I was the youth pastor at Bethel Temple in Hampton, Virginia. I'd been there for about 2 years, and by all stretches of the imagination, things were going very well. We had a very fast-growing youth group. We'd grown from 35 students to over 200 students in the 2 years that I'd been there. We were kind of like the hot happening youth group and the hot happening church in town. We were gaining statewide recognition as well as national recognition in our denomination. Things were going extremely well. But at the beginning of 1985, I couldn't escape this gnawing, gut-level feeling that I had that something was missing, that there had to be something more. And I sat one night in a Chi-Chi's Mexican restaurant after a student ministry gathering with a national student ministry leader, and I was just kind of pouring out my heart to him, just telling him how I felt at the time. He challenged me that night to study the New Testament church. So for the next several months, I just immersed myself in everything I could get my hands on. I read the book of Acts over and over and over again. I read the various letters that Paul wrote to the New Testament churches. I read articles and books about the New Testament church. I listened to other people's sermons about the New Testament church. And in the process, God began to crystallize a vision in my heart and mind. It was a vision for a church that would reach unchurched people and then teach them to live for Jesus. Later on that year, I began to sense that God was calling me to do something I said I would never do. I'd always said I would never pastor a church, and if I ever did, I would darn sure never start one from the ground up. Just so you know, never say never when God's involved, because He has a way of changing your heart. And He began to do that. He began to put in my heart the idea of planting a church that was based upon what I'd been studying. And at the time, I thought, that's a ways off. You know, we're going to have to put a team together. We're going to have to put a ministry action plan together, raise money. It's going to take probably about 5 years for us to do that. And that was my plan. But God had a different plan. I met with my senior pastor one day, and he looked across the desk at me and said, Dave, you need to go do this right now. That was October of 1985. January of 1986, Susan and I sold our house, packed everything up in a U-Haul, and moved to Durham, North Carolina, where we had no people, no building, no money. All we had was a vision from God and a desire to see God do something more. This is where the dream first became reality. In 1986, there was a hotel sitting here called the University Inn. And on the last Sunday of January, we pulled in my Toyota Camry and unpacked our entire church from the trunk. We set it up in the ballroom and had our very first service. In that first service, we had a grand total of 35 people, and we thought that was great. Little did we know the day would come when we'd have more people in our bathrooms on Sunday than we had in our very first service. A few months after we got started, we moved into an old church building that used to sit right here where TK Tripp's restaurant is behind me. That would be our church home for the next 5 years. And it was here that God once again began to stir our hearts for something more. The church had grown to about 200 people, but we realized we weren't reaching unchurched people. People weren't getting saved in our church, and we knew that's what we'd come here to do. So we started to look around at other churches that were reaching unchurched people to see what they were doing that we weren't. And one of the big things that we learned is that you've got to be willing to do whatever it takes to reach the unchurched. And that's a value that's still alive in our church today. After renting that old church building for 5 years, we finally moved out and moved into this elementary school gym, and this is where we had church for the next 7 years. Every Sunday, our volunteer teams would pull up out back behind this gym in a Ryder truck, pulling a trailer full of sound equipment and children's ministry equipment and welcome team equipment. They'd unload it all, we'd set up a stage and chairs, and we'd turn this place into a place where we had church. It was here that we really began to apply many of the values and principles that you see alive in our church still today. And it was here that God began to do even more than He'd ever done before. We began to see more people come. The church began to grow. People were getting saved, recommitting their lives to Christ. We added staff. We added a second service. God was just doing more and more and more. And finally we came to the place where we realized we couldn't meet here any longer. We had outgrown Hillendale Elementary School, and it was time for us to step out in faith and trust God for more than we'd ever trusted Him for before. It was time to build our own church home. In 2000, we launched a capital campaign called Building the Dream. And that campaign was designed to help us buy land and build our first phase facility. We looked everywhere for land, and finally God led us here to this beautiful 50-acre campus that is now our church home. In 2003, we finalized the purchase of the land and began the construction process. And none of this made any sense, but we just stepped out in faith and trusted God, and once again, He did way more than we ever expected Him to. Easter of 2004 was our first service in this building. And I remember just a few nights before that coming into this room and sitting here all by myself. I was the only one in the building. And I sat here and looked around at all these chairs, and I thought to myself, this place is really big. What if nobody comes? But then on Easter morning, hundreds of cars came flooding into the parking lot. Hundreds of people came through the doors, and they filled up the blue chairs. And it was one of the most amazing days in my life, and one of the most amazing days in the life and history of this church. Everything since then has been kind of a blur. God has blessed us. We've tripled in size. We've seen hundreds of people come to Christ. Hundreds of people return to Christ. We've seen hundreds of people baptized. We've seen marriages saved, families restored, addictions, hurts, habits, hang-ups dealt with. It's been amazing to watch God work in this place. And one of the coolest things in my mind, though, is how God has now taken our ministry beyond the four walls of this place into our own community. We've provided over 10,000 meals through our outreach to the Durham Rescue Mission. We've fed 4,800 hungry people through the M25 food drops. We've provided 2,000 brand new backpacks filled with school supplies for children at C.C. Spalding Elementary School, along with winter coats and shoes. We've participated in the building of 3 Habitat for Humanity houses, and we've given over $50,000 to our community ministry partners. To be honest with you, it's all been a little overwhelming. On that first Sunday 25 years ago, we knew that God had His hand on this thing and that God had very special plans for this church. But God has done so much more than we could ask, think, or imagine. So here we are. It's been 25 years. It's been an awesome journey. And you've heard me say this dozens of times, but I've got to say it one more time today. It's not about us. This is not our church. It's not for us. It's not about us. It's about a great and awesome God who in His great grace and mercy allows us to be a part of His plan to redeem the world back to Himself. New Horizon, the last 25 years have been awesome, but in the next 25 years, we're going to see even more as God works in and through us.